They thought it was a harmless party. They thought my boat was theirs to use, theirs to trash, theirs to claim like spoiled queens of the sea. The Karen sisters, bold as ever, arrived with a swarm of guests. Music blasting, drinks spilling, and laughter so loud it drowned out the sound of the waves. They didn't ask, they didn't care. My boat was just another toy to them, another stage for their endless show of arrogance. But the ocean is not a playground. It is patient, powerful, and merciless. That night, I decided I wouldn't stop them. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg for respect they would never give. I simply let them have their party. I let them dance, drink, and scream into the night. And then, when the tide shifted and the shore disappeared behind us, I let them float. The music turned hollow. The laughter began to crack. The waves grew darker, and so did their faces when they realized the truth: no land in sight, no way back, no control. Fear replaced arrogance. Panic swallowed their pride, and for the first time, the Karen sisters weren't in charge. The ocean was. What followed was not just a night of fear, it was a reckoning. They thought it was a harmless party. They thought my boat was theirs to use, theirs to trash, theirs to claim like spoiled queens of the sea. The Karen sisters, bold as ever, arrived with a swarm of guests, music blasting, drinks spilling, and laughter so loud it drowned out the sound of the waves. They didn't ask, they didn't care. My boat was just another toy to them, another stage for their endless show of arrogance. But the ocean is not a playground. It is patient, powerful, and merciless. That night, I decided I wouldn't stop them. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg for respect they would never give. I simply let them have their party. I let them dance, drink, and scream into the night. And then, when the tide shifted and the shore disappeared behind us, I let them float. The music turned hollow. The laughter began to crack. The waves grew darker, and so did their faces when they realized the truth: no land in sight, no way back, no control. Fear replaced arrogance. Panic swallowed their pride, and for the first time, the Karen sisters weren't in charge. The ocean was. What followed was not just a night of fear, it was a reckoning. The night air carried a salty breeze, the kind that usually calmed me after long days. The harbor lights glowed faintly in the distance, their reflections breaking into shimmering fragments on the black water. My boat, the Horizon, rested proudly at its dock, her sleek white body glistening faintly under the moonlight. She wasn't just a boat to me, she was years of sweat, savings, and sacrifices all tied into one floating vessel. Every time I saw her, I felt the same spark of pride I had the first day I signed the ownership papers. But that pride turned into something darker the moment I heard the noise. At first, I thought it was music drifting over from one of the nearby docks. Sometimes, especially on weekends, younger crowds would blast speakers and laugh until the early hours. But this wasn't. Distant, the thumping bass vibrated through the water, pulsing straight into my chest. I stopped mid-stride, frowning, my eyes narrowing on my boat. The sound was coming from her, from my deck. As I drew closer, the flashes of colored lights gave it away. Someone had strung up cheap LEDs along the railings, turning my quiet vessel into a makeshift nightclub. Voices overlapped with music, loud, careless, and drunk with entitlement. Laughter carried across the water, mixed with the pop of bottles being opened. The scrape of high heels against the polished deck. My stomach twisted and heat surged into my chest. Someone was throwing a party on my boat, not just someone. As I stepped onto the dock, I recognized them immediately. The Karen sisters. There were 3 of them, though it always felt like 30 with the way they took up space, demanded attention, and treated the world as if it existed for their amusement. I'd crossed paths with them before, always unpleasant encounters. They had reputations around town, loud, entitled, and endlessly complaining when they didn't get what they wanted. I'd overheard one of them once calling me the boring boat guy because I didn't let strangers aboard without permission. I didn't care about their opinions then, but seeing them now dancing and shrieking on my deck like they owned it ignited something in me. The youngest sister, blonde with too much makeup smeared across her face, was standing on the bow with her arms stretched wide, screaming lyrics to the music. Another one, tall with sharp eyes and a permanent scowl, barked at someone to refill her glass. The third, the self-proclaimed leader, wore a glittering dress that sparkled in the flashing lights, and she shouted over the music about how this was the best party ever, and not one of them noticed me. My shoes hit the dock with sharp taps, but even as I got closer, none of the guests turned their heads. There must have been 20 of them, all strangers, their shoes scuffing the deck I had carefully polished, their drinks spilling onto the wood I had varnished by hand. They laughed like hyenas, bumping into railings, pressing their sweaty palms against the windows of the cabin. My jaw tightened. Each careless movement felt like a knife into something personal. I could have stormed up the ramp, demanded they leave immediately. I could have called the harbor patrol and had the whole lot of them thrown out for trespassing. But as I stood there in the shadows of the dock, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just angry, I was calm. Too calm. I watched them, the way they danced without thought, the way the Karen sisters strutted across my deck like royalty on a stolen throne. They didn't just invade my space, they mocked it with every laugh, every spill, every still, every stomp of their shoes. And that was when the idea came. I didn't plan it. It came to me like the whisper of the tide, subtle but irresistible. If they wanted to take my boat, if they wanted to act like it was theirs, then let them have it. But let them have it on my terms, not theirs. The thought sat heavy in my chest, sparking with a quiet thrill. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to let the ocean teach them a lesson they would never forget. I stepped quietly onto the deck. Still, nobody noticed me. The music was too loud, their laughter too consuming. I moved among them like a ghost. The guests brushed past me without a second glance, caught up in their shallow conversations. One of them even shoved a plastic cup of beer into my hand, thinking I was part of the crowd. I didn't drink it. I let it slip between my fingers, spilling onto the floorboards, blending with the other stains they'd already made. The Karen sisters were too busy dancing and shouting at each other to see me disappear into the cabin. My hands were steady as I reached for the ignition, the controls as familiar as the lines on my own palms. The engines roared to life beneath the party, sending vibrations up through the deck. A few guests stumbled, startled, but they laughed it off as if it were part of the show. I eased the boat away from the dock, the dark water swallowing the distance. The shoreline slipped further behind us, its lights fading into specks. The music thumped on, oblivious, until the harbor was gone, replaced by endless black water and the silver glow of the moon. The boat cut through the sea smoothly, carrying its cargo of uninvited passengers into the night. I guided it calmly, my face expressionless, my heart steady. The plan was already in motion, and there was no turning back. When I finally let go of the wheel, the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. I wasn't just taking them away from the shore. I was letting them see the ocean for what it really was, vast, merciless, and far greater than their arrogance. I leaned back, listening to the faint hum of the engines beneath the music, watching as the Karen sisters laughed without realizing the stage they were standing on was about to change everything. The sea doesn't care about pride. It doesn't care about power. Out here, there are no rules except the ones nature writes. And soon, the Karen sisters would understand that better than anyone. The boat drifted further from the safety of the harbor, its lights swallowed by the vast darkness of the sea. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying that deep, salty sting only open waters possess. From the deck above, the music still thumped, with reckless energy, masking the growing distance from land. I stood silently at the wheel for a moment longer, watching the horizon fade, then cut the engines. The sudden silence of the boat's machinery was jarring, but it was quickly drowned again by the drunken shouting above. They had no idea what had just happened. When I stepped back onto the deck, the scene hadn't changed much. The Karen sisters were still at the center, shrieking laughter and snapping selfies against the backdrop of the black ocean, their phones glowing in the dark like tiny stars. Their guests staggered about, holding drinks, oblivious to the fact that the shoreline was gone. It was strange, almost surreal, how easily they ignored the world around them. They were trapped in their own little bubble of noise and alcohol, and I was the only one who knew the truth that the ocean had swallowed the safety of land and left us floating alone in its endless expanse. It wasn't long, though, before someone noticed. A man in a wrinkled shirt stumbled to the railing and peered out at the horizon. His laughter died on his lips as he squinted into the blackness. "Hey," he muttered, too softly for anyone but me to hear. "Where's the shore?" I didn't answer. I just watched him turn around, his drunken smile faltering. He grabbed another guest by the arm and pointed out toward the water. Soon, 2 or 3 more began to murmur, their eyes scanning the emptiness around us. The music still played, but now there was hesitation in their movements, a shift in the air. The Karen sisters, however, remained unfazed. "Relax," shouted the eldest, her jeweled dress shimmering in the LED lights. "This is all part of the fun. A midnight cruise, people. Don't freak out just because you can't see some boring land." She raised her cup high, forcing a cheer from the group, and the music blared louder as if to drown out the rising uncertainty. But I could see it, fear creeping in at the edges of their drunken bravado. People laughed nervously, their voices just a bit too sharp, their movements just a bit too quick. They huddled closer together, glancing back at the sisters for reassurance, and the sisters, oblivious or pretending to be, carried on as though nothing had changed. I leaned against the railing, silent, watching it unfold. Every crashing wave against the hull seemed to grow louder than the music. Every gust of wind carried the smell of salt and something heavier, something that reminded me of how small we truly were out here. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth broke through their illusions. It happened when the youngest sister, the one with the smeared makeup, pulled her phone up to take another photo. She held it high, angling for the perfect shot, but then froze. The glow of her screen reflected off her wide eyes. "No service," she shrieked, pressing her phone to her face. She waved it around, as if signal might magically appear if she just lifted it higher. "What the hell? Why isn't there any service?" The words hit the group like a stone tossed into still water. Conversations stopped. A few people grabbed their phones, tapping at screens. frowning as they realized the same thing. No bars, no messages, no connection to the world they thought they still belonged to. The middle sister snapped, her sharp voice cutting through the murmurs. Stop panicking, we're fine. We're on a boat, in case you forgot. Of course, service is spotty, just enjoy yourselves. She poured herself another drink and threw it back, but I could see the stiffness in her shoulders. Even she wasn't fully convinced. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than anything I could have shouted. I simply stood there, letting them wrestle with the realization themselves. The ocean was vast, indifferent, and unforgiving. It was all around us. The night deepened. The air turned colder, the sea rougher. Waves began to slap harder against the hull, jolting the deck beneath their careless feet. The laughter faded slowly, like a candle guttering in the wind. Guests began to whisper, their words nervous and sharp-edged. I caught fragments. How far are we? Shouldn't we be back by now? Who's driving this thing? Finally, the eldest sister noticed me. Her eyes, outlined with smudged eyeliner, narrowed as she stormed toward where I stood by the rail. You, she barked, pointing, a finger tipped with red polish. You're the boat guy, aren't you? You need to turn this thing around right now. People are getting nervous. I met her gaze calmly, my voice low and steady. This isn't your boat. You never asked to be here. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For a moment, she seemed caught off guard by the quiet power in my words. Then her arrogance resurfaced. Don't play games. Just take us back now. I tilted my head toward the sea, the endless black waves stretching in every direction. Back where I asked, can you even tell which way the shore is? Her face paled. She glanced around, suddenly unsure, then quickly covered it with anger. This isn't funny. You think scaring people makes you the bigger person? I didn't answer. I let the silence hang heavy, let the sound of the waves replace my words. She hated it, being ignored, being powerless. I saw it in the way her chest heaved, the way her hands shook as she clenched them into fists around us. The guests were restless. The younger sister was near tears, clutching her useless phone. The middle one was trying to gather people together, insisting everything was fine, even as her voice cracked. But the truth was out, and it spread faster than the music ever had. We were stranded, alone, surrounded by nothing but water and darkness. The music finally died when someone knocked over the speaker in their panic. The silence that followed was louder than any sound I'd ever heard. It pressed on them, on all of us, until the only thing left was the rhythm of the ocean and the faint whistle of the wind. That was when I spoke again, my voice carrying clearly in the stillness. You wanted to party on my boat. You wanted to act like it was yours. Well, now it is. Out here, it's all yours. The sisters stared at me, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. The guests looked from me to them, realization dawning like a slow, creeping storm. And beneath it all, the sea rolled on, vast and merciless, reminding us who really held the power. The party was over. The ocean has a way of stripping away illusions. At first, it's just endless black water, easy to ignore if you're distracted with music and laughter. But once silence falls, once you really hear it's the crash of waves against the hull, the hollow groan of the boat shifting, it becomes something else, something alive. The guests on my deck were beginning to realize that the party's energy had drained like spilled liquor, leaving only fragments of nervous chatter. A handful clung to their cups, sipping shakily as if alcohol could mask the dread building inside them. Others whispered to one another in sharp tones, their words breaking off when anyone tried to listen. The younger sister paced frantically with her phone held high, swearing under her breath every time the no-service icon flashed across the screen. The middle sister stood stiff-backed, barking orders at people stay calm. Sit down. Stop whining, though. Her hands trembled as she gestured. And then there was the eldest. She didn't pace, she didn't panic. She stood at the bow, staring out into the endless dark as if she could bend it to her will. Her chin was high, her eyes narrowed, and I knew she was already planning how to turn this all back on me. What's the kind of woman who never admitted defeat, never accepted blame? I remained near the wheel, leaning against the railing, letting the sea's rhythm fill the silence between us. I didn't need to speak. The ocean was speaking for me, reminding them of their fragility. Every wave that rocked the deck, every groan of the wooden planks beneath their feet, pulled them further from their false sense of control. It was one of the guests, a young man in a baseball cap, who finally cracked. His voice trembled as he shouted, "We're lost. We're seriously lost out here." He grabbed at the middle sister's arm, his eyes wild. "Tell him to turn it round. He has to know where the harbor is." All eyes turned to me. The eldest sister stormed forward, her heels clacking against the wet deck. She stopped inches from my face, her perfume mixing sickly with the salt air. "Enough," she hissed. "This game of yours ends now. You think you can scare us? You think you can embarrass us? Turn this boat around, right now." Her words were sharp, but I saw the flicker of fear behind them. She wasn't asking, she was begging, dressed in anger. I straightened slowly, letting the silence stretch until it pressed down on her shoulders. Then I spoke, my voice calm and steady. "You don't understand. Out here, There is no around. There's only water, in every direction. You wanted to take my boat, so I gave it to you. Now it's yours. You decide what to do with it. Murmurs rippled through the group. Someone cursed under their breath. Another guest sat down heavily on the deck, burying their face in their hands. Panic was growing, and it was contagious. The middle sister snapped, her voice cracking under pressure. He's bluffing. He knows the way back he has to. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. You'll go to jail for this. Do you hear me? Jail? I didn't flinch. Maybe, I said softly. But the sea doesn't care about jail. That silenced her. The youngest sister suddenly screamed, pointing out toward the horizon. Heads whipped in her direction. At first I thought it was panic, a trick of her imagination, but then I saw it, two dark shapes rising and falling against the faint shimmer of moonlight, waves taller than before. The wind was shifting, carrying with it a low, distant roar that every sailor knows too well. A storm was coming. The guests began shouting all at once, their fear breaking into chaos. Some demanded I steer us back. Others begged the sisters to do something. The sisters themselves erupted into argument. This is your fault, the youngest shrieked at the eldest. You said this would be fun. Don't you dare blame me, the eldest snapped. You were the one who dragged everyone onto this boat in the first place. The middle sister shoved between them, her voice sharp and panicked. Both of you, shut up. We need to figure this out before a wave slammed against the hull, cutting her off. The boat lurched violently, sending drinks, bags, and people sprawling across the deck. Screams filled the air. Someone slipped, hitting the railing with a sickening thud before scrambling upright. The music speaker, long since silent, toppled overboard with a splash, swallowed instantly by the dark water. I held my ground, gripping the railing as the boat rocked. The ocean was reminding them, louder than I ever could, that it was in control. The eldest sister stumbled to her feet, her hair wild, her glittering dress soaked at the hem. She pointed at me with shaking hands. Fix this. You're the captain, you have to fix this. I looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, I'm not your captain. You made that clear the moment you stepped aboard without asking. Her face twisted with rage and desperation. You can't just let us die out here, then. Maybe, I replied, my voice cold as the wind whipping around us. You should have thought of that before you treated everything and everyone like they belonged to you. The words hit her harder than the waves. For the first time that night she had no reply. She stood trembling, staring at me as though seeing me for the first time, not as some quiet boat owner she could push aside, but as someone who held all the power she had tried so hard to claim. The guests were unraveling quickly. Some huddled together, crying quietly. Others shouted accusations, their voices rising above the crash of waves. The sisters were no longer united, their bond cracking under the weight of fear. They lashed out at one another, each one desperate to shift blame, to claw back some sense of control. But the truth was undeniable. The sea didn't care who was at fault. The storm was coming, and it was bigger than all of them. As thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, I lifted my gaze to the horizon. Dark clouds were rolling in, blotting out the stars. The first drops of rain splattered against my face. Cold and sharp, the ocean was preparing to show its true power, and deep inside I felt no fear, only a grim satisfaction. The Karen sisters wanted my boat. Now, they had it. The storm did not wait. The first heavy gust tore through the deck like a scream, sending plastic cups skittering across the floor and whipping hair into tangled messes. The guests clutched at rails and one another, their voices drowned out by the sudden howl of the wind. Lightning flashed far in the distance, briefly illuminating the endless stretch of black water. A second later, thunder followed a deep, prowling growl that vibrated in my chest. Then the rain came. It began with scattered drops, sharp and cold against our skin, but quickly thickened into sheets of water that lashed against us with merciless force. The polished deck, once a stage for drunken laughter, became slick and treacherous. People scrambled, slipping and sliding. Their shouts now roar with terror instead of joy. The youngest sister shrieked, clutching her soaked phone to her chest as though it were a lifeline. It's not supposed to be like this, she cried, her voice cracking. Make it stop. The middle sister tried to take charge, though her hands shook as she pointed wildly. Everyone inside, get below deck, she shouted, but few listened. Panic made them deaf, scattering them like frightened birds. Some rushed toward the cabin. Others froze in place, staring helplessly at the towering waves that began to rise around us. The elder sister stood stubbornly at the bow, her dress plastered, with her body by the rain, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. She spread her arms as though daring the storm to challenge her, screaming into the void. This is our boat. You can't scare us. A massive wave slammed into the hull, nearly toppling her overboard. She caught the railing at the last second, her scream piercing the storm. Whatever illusions of control she had left were ripped away in that moment. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was just another frightened soul at the mercy of the sea. I gripped the wheel, steadying the boat as best I could, but the storm was no respecter of human hands. The vessel rose and dropped violently with each swell, the wood groaning in protest. Water sprayed over the deck, soaking us all, chilling our bones. I could feel the Karen sisters' fear radiating through the chaos, though their arrogance made them fight it tooth and nail. Inside the cabin, some of the guests huddled together, eyes wide and lips trembling as the storm battered the windows. Others were still outside, slipping in their panic as they tried to secure bags or cling to railings. One man clutched a bottle of liquor as though it might anchor him. Another knelt in prayer, his voice lost in the wind. The middle sister stormed up to me, her face pale and streaked with rain. "You have to take us back," she shouted over the roar. "You'll kill us all if you don't." I met her eyes, steady despite the chaos. "The ocean doesn't take orders," I said. "You wanted my boat, you wanted to treat it like your playground. Now you see what it really is." Her lips trembled, words failing her. For once she had no clever retort, no venom to spit back. She simply staggered away, clutching the railing as another wave slammed into us. The youngest sister was sobbing uncontrollably. Mascara smeared across her cheeks, her voice shrill. "We're going to die. We're all going to die," she wailed. She clawed at her sister's arm, desperate for comfort. But the middle one shook her off, too consumed by her own terror. The eldest finally stumbled back from the bow, soaked and trembling, her arrogance shattered. She collapsed onto the deck near me, her glittering dress heavy with rain, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please don't let us die out here." Her plea was quieter than the storm, but I heard it, and it was all I needed to know that their power, every ounce of entitlement they had carried aboard, gone. The storm raged harder, waves crashing over the deck with enough force to knock people off their feet. The boat tilted violently, the wood creaking and moaning with each assault. A guest screamed as a cooler slid across the deck and slammed into his legs. Another clung to the mast, his knuckles white, his body shaking, and still the ocean roared. I worked the wheel, guiding the boat as best I could to keep its nose toward the waves. But I knew I couldn't control everything. Out here you could only respect the sea and hope it allowed you passage. Every movement of the boat reminded the sisters and their guests of that truth. They were ants tossed into a hurricane, powerless against nature's fury. Another bolt of lightning split the sky, blinding us for a heartbeat, followed by a thunderclap so loud it rattled the bones. The youngest screamed again, covering her ears, while the middle sister cursed and kicked at the water pooling around her feet. The eldest just sat slumped against the railing, staring blankly at the horizon, her spirit broken. For hours, though, it felt like days. The storm battered us. People cried, people prayed. Some simply sat in shock, too numb to respond. And through it all, the Karen sisters, once so loud, so demanding, were reduced to three soaked, trembling figures huddled together near the mast. Their glitter, their makeup, their carefully cultivated power, all of it washed away by the sea. Eventually, the storm began to ease. The waves, still tall and dangerous, no longer towered like mountains. The rain softened to a steady drizzle. The wind calmed, though it still tugged at our clothes and hair. The boat, though battered and groaning, still floated. We had survived. The guests emerged slowly from the cabin, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. They looked at me not with anger, not with arrogance, but with something closer to respect. They knew who had kept the wheel steady when the storm wanted to tear us apart. The sisters, too, looked different. Their eyes, once sharp with entitlement, now brimmed with exhaustion and shame. The eldest finally broke the silence, her voice ragged. We thought we could handle anything," she whispered. "But out here, nothing listens to us." I said nothing. The ocean had spoken for me. The boat rocked gently now, carried by calmer swells, but the damage was done. The Karen sisters were not the rulers of this deck anymore. They were just passengers, humbled and silent, finally realizing the truth they had fought so hard to ignore. And as dawn began to creep across the horizon, painting the water with streaks of silver, I knew the lesson was far from over. The sea, that had broken them. Now it was time to see what was left when pride finally drowned. The first light of dawn broke gently across the horizon, softening the jagged shadows left behind by the storm. The sea, which had roared and clawed at us through the night, now lay calmer, though still restless beneath the surface. Waves rolled, steadily rocking the boat with a quieter rhythm, as if the ocean itself was exhaling after a night of fury. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in every trembling body on deck. The guests sat huddled in silence, their clothes soaked, their hair plastered to their faces, their eyes hollow. They looked nothing like the laughing, careless crowd who had spilled onto my boat hours ago. Their arrogance had been washed away, replaced with something raw, heavier, fear. The Karen sisters, once the loudest voices among them, now sat side by side near the mast, their dresses ruined, their makeup smeared into masks of exhaustion. They didn't shout, they didn't demand. They simply stared into the endless water, their pride as broken as the scattered bottles rolling quietly across the deck. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sounds were the creaks of the boat, the rhythmic splash of waves, and the occasional sob of someone too shaken to stay silent. I stood at the wheel, my hands steady, my eyes scanning the horizon. I could see the faint outline of the shoreline in the distance now, barely visible through the pale morning hazeland. Safety, but I didn't turn the boat just yet. The silence stretched until the eldest sister finally broke it, her voice hoarse, nothing like the commanding tone she had always used. "Why did you do this?" she asked, her words thin and fragile. "Why let us out here? Why scare us like that?" I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. She was shivering, though the rain had stopped, though the storm had moved on. I held her eyes and spoke quietly, each word deliberate. "Because you never listen. You take, you demand. You act as if nothing and no one matters but you. You thought you could steal my boat, use it like a toy, and walk away laughing. But out here, the ocean doesn't care who you are. Out here, you face the truth." The middle sister bristled, but her voice cracked when she tried to speak. We didn't mean." Her words trailed off, swallowed by the weight of what she knew couldn't be excused. The youngest sister, her face streaked with dried tears, whispered softly, "I thought it was just a party." She hugged herself tighter. I didn't think it would be like this." I let their words hang in the air. I wanted them to feel the silence, the weight of it, heavier than any lecture could be. Finally, I turned the wheel and aimed the boat back toward shore. The engine rumbled to life, steady and familiar, pulling us closer to the faint line of safety. No one cheered, no one clapped. Relief came not with joy, but with silence. The guests remained quiet, staring numbly ahead. The sisters, once desperate for attention, no longer tried to draw eyes to themselves. They sat broken, humbled. And for the first time since I had known them small, the hours passed slowly as the boat cut through calmer waters. The sun climbed higher, warming our cold, rain-soaked clothes, but it didn't erase the night we had endured. Every jolt of the boat against a wave made people flinch, a reminder of how fragile their control had truly been. As we neared the harbor, the familiar outline of the docks and buildings came into view. The sight of land brought tears to more than one pair of eyes. Some of the guests whispered prayers of thanks. Others simply slumped further into their seats, too drained to react. The Karen sisters stood together, their shoulders touching, their usual sharp edges dulled. When the boat finally eased into the dock, the silence broke with the creak of ropes, the thud of bumpers, and the clatter of footsteps rushing for escape. Guests hurried off the deck without a word, their shoes slapping against the wooden planks of the dock as they scattered into the safety of land. Not one of them looked back. The sisters, however, lingered. They didn't storm off with the same arrogance they had arrived with. They didn't sneer or laugh. They stood facing me, their expressions heavy with something they'd never shown before, humility. The eldest spoke first, her voice low. "We'll never forget this." There was no venom in her words, no sarcasm, only a truth spoken through gritted teeth. The middle one nodded faintly, unable to meet my eyes. The youngest whispered, "I'm sorry," before brushing past her sisters and stepping onto the dock, and then they were gone. Just like that. 3 women who once thought the world bent around them had been forced to see how little power they truly held when faced with something greater than themselves. I stood alone on the deck, the sun warming my skin, the boat rocking gently against the dock. The horizon had survived the storm, just as I had. But the sisters, they would never be the same. The sea had stripped them bare, shown them their weakness, and left them with nothing but the memory of their fear. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was deeper, a quiet satisfaction, knowing the ocean had done what words could never do. It had humbled the Karen sisters, and I knew, with certainty, that they would never dare set foot on my boat again. The sea had spoken, and its lesson would linger forever.